Good morning, everybody. This is another edition of the Castball Show brought to you by Pielli.com as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Brought to you by Two Ways, One Passion Food Truck located in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Also by Budweiser, the king of beers, and Castrol Motor Oil, engineered for today's smaller cars. Anything that's on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America, you can comment on the Facebook Live or Periscope feed. And I do apologize if there's anything messed up with the camera. We tried a different camera angle today. We'll see how it ends up working out. There's a handful of topics we're going to get into, but I'm also in a position where I feel like I'm flexible. I can move around. We can talk about different topics, different things that are on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America, and always want to bring that out there, let you know that you guys control the show. I'm just here kind of, navigating. A couple different things are kind of bothering me today, and we're going to get into the whole umpires thing in a minute or two, but I do want to talk a little bit about the upcoming NBA draft and kind of used a little bit of a double entendre when we talked about the top three in the NBA and where they rank and what they're about. Because I think you can think of the top three as they apply to this year's draft, which obviously is going to, be held tomorrow on Thursday, the 20th of June, 2019. And then you could also talk about the top three players in the NBA and where they rank in regards to the rest. And you could open up a little debate. Maybe, hey, who are the best three players right now in the NBA? But I think as we've seen in previous years, when we are looking at the draft, the top player drafted number one overall isn't necessarily the best player in the sport, or doesn't necessarily end up becoming the biggest of stars. And I think that's something that always has to be brought up. And I'm going to bring up a couple things about the NHL draft, which will be up on this Friday. But you hear the umpires and their association getting involved, and it looks like, and you can try to be logical with this, they're probably a little bit tired of Manny Machado and his antics. And I think there's a reason that he gets, some negative play. Some of the things he does on the field, his attitude. You've looked, some players have played against him, and some players that have even played with Manny Machado have not necessarily given him the most ringing of endorsements. And I think that does speak a lot about the player. So when he's involved in an altercation or something that is going on the field, as for whatever reason I can't find the freaking backspace button, but obviously it's going to stand out, and people are going to be talking once again about Manny Machado and negative things about Manny Machado. Now, he still is, when it comes to the top 10 or so, maybe 12 to 15 at the very worst, if you want to be the most critical in ranking Manny Machado, but he's still one of the top players in all of Major League Baseball. Obviously had the year last year with the Orioles where he was dealt to the Dodgers and played in the World Series and claimed he wasn't Johnny Hustle, and certain different things that will make you feel negatively about Manny Machado. But he's involved in an incident, and if you watched the reaction, and you don't know what he said because there's no mics, Manny Machado and the umpire are basically the two ones that know exactly what Machado said, but obviously didn't like a call, kind of charged at the umpire, made very little contact. I don't think it was a horrific act. This wasn't a situation where somebody was trying to hurt him. This wasn't Bill Clem getting assaulted in 1912 or 1915 when stuff like that really happened. So the umpires kind of, they've had it with Manny Machado. So they have this statement, they use all these different hashtags and basically make the situation out to be a lot worse than it really is. And Manny Machado ends up looking like almost like a person that assaulted an umpire, a person that is provoking violence. And I'd hate to even use the word, but the way the umpires make this look out almost kind of paints the picture of Manny Machado as a terrorist. And, these are all things that aren't true, but it goes through the lengthy debate that we always have when we talk about Major League Baseball and its umpires, that there seems to be very little accountability, and it's almost like a little boys club amongst the umpires that are still trying to do whatever they want. You got the Joe West of the world that are, hey, like, look at me. You got the umpire early on in the season, I think it was Ron Kolpa, that yells at A.J. Hinch, says, I can do whatever I want. And then you see instances like Manny Machado getting suspended for a game. Did he make contact with the umpire? Did he not make contact with the umpire? Maybe it was warranted, maybe it wasn't. Josh Donaldson upset about being hit by a pitch by Joe Musgrove. He doesn't charge the mound. He makes a step towards it, doesn't throw a punch, gets suspended for a game. Joe Musgrove in that same game is thrown out. Earlier on in the season, you have Tim Anderson Cadillac in a home run that he hits off of Brad Keller. Keller hits him the next time up. Now Anderson essentially walks back to the dugout. Keller's upset. He gets thrown out of the game. Tim Anderson does too. There's a lot of things that are going on with Major League Baseball umpires that are not according to what you would expect from the umpires. The umpires are taking a little bit too much liberties in their control of this game. Now, maybe it's a fear that they are losing control over the game. But the bottom line, we can talk about accountability as it's out there, instances like the ones that I just pointed out, to basically say that the umpires are not doing their job. And then we can talk about the call aspect. We can talk about strike zones. We can talk about blown calls that are happening left and right. Blown calls that can't be reviewed, that in some cases are making an impact on who wins or loses a game. And we know in baseball, the difference between a positive mentality and a negative mentality is scoring one run less than your opposition or one run more than your opposition. So you're seeing certain calls, certain things that aren't going the certain way of a team, whether they're right or wrong, impacting where a team sits in the standings or impacts their mindset over whether they feel confident to be able to go forward with a winning mentality or think this season has something that's worth playing for. And the umpires have had a play in it. But the problem that I've had with umpires in Major League Baseball over the last several years is you're seeing a lack of accountability. You're seeing umpires in some cases act like complete jerks and not being held accountable. Maybe they are a little bit behind the scenes and it's not going public, but there's very few umpires that are suspended for their actions. And if you're the Major League Baseball Players Association, you're going to be insulted when the Umpire Association, talks almost in a vulgar sense about one of your players. Manny Machado didn't push the umpire. Manny Machado didn't assault the umpire. Manny Machado, sure, you can make a case that he acted like a little baby the other day. He probably shouldn't have. But it comes down to the interpretation of the call and the fact that umpires in Major League Baseball have struggled for years to have any sort of a consistent strike zone. If you got an umpire that has a strike zone that's consistent within his judgment, that's a big surprise. But from one umpire to the other, you're having games called in a completely different way. And we also have the thought that maybe it's time to get into the computerized strike zone. Now, I'm not a big advocate of it. It's not something that I want to see happen. It kind of bothers me to think about that because, you're talking about something that is kind of man-made, man-created, kind of controlled by the human element that exists in sports. And the more that you go to a computer or a replay system, the less human control or human error you're going to see within a sport. Now, the human error can be done without, of course. You see what happened in the NFC Championship game last year with the Saints and the Rams. Human error probably cost one team an opportunity to get to the Super Bowl and allowed for the other team to win that game. So you want to try to have the difference between who wins and who loses determined by the play, by the players on the field, not by the officials, not by the umpires. And I think any umpire that's listening to the program right now would understand that. Their job is to officiate the game according to the rules of the game. And unfortunately, you're seeing, yes, mistakes happen from any human being. And any human being that's out there that doesn't think they make a mistake can't be any further out of touch because we all make mistakes. That's not what is being criticized right now. It's the lack of consistency in the sport, but also the lack of accountability that exists in regards to its umpires. Umpires right now have no fear of losing their job. The more tenure and the more seniority they build up in the sport almost guarantees them a job for life. And you compare that to the players that exist in that sport, that if those same players don't perform, if they go from being a very good player to a mediocre player to a player that is below replacement level, they're likely out of the sport. You're finding that there's good players in the major leagues over the last 5 years or so that are losing their jobs, that are being designated for assignment, that are hoping to latch on to another Major League Baseball team on a minor league contract. And umpires can make the same mistakes over and over again. The umpires can be rated negatively time after time after time after time and continue to not only have their jobs but have no fear in losing their jobs. And that's something that's a concern to me, because I'm not asking umpires to lose their jobs, but I'm asking umpires to be rated the same way the players are rated that are on the field. Now, I understand the players are going to make way more money than umpires will ever make over the course of their lives. And I understand that. And if you want to throw that at me as a rebuttal, I have no issue with that. But you're looking at the fact that umpires can make the same mistakes and not be held as accountable as players are. You know, you look at certain players that have made certain amount of money over the course of their career, has had some of their success, but if they have a bad year, they could be on their way out of the sport. Now, there are second and third chances that exist, and like I said, you know, minor league contracts that exist for the most struggling of players that may give them another opportunity to get to the big leagues again, but there's no system set up like that for the minors. The worst umpires, the umpires that are performing the worst on a consistent basis, have no risk of going to the minor leagues, have no worries about any sort of progressive discipline that's done against them, and that's a problem. And if you've got umpires that are not doing their job correctly, I'm sure there's umpires in the minor leagues. I'm sure there are people that are sitting on their couch that would love to go to umpiring school, that consider themselves good arbiters and may be able to do a good job, that aren't getting a chance because you have a series of umpires in Major League Baseball that almost have that job for life. And having that job for life is good if they're doing it well, but it's not proven that all of them are doing it well. And a lot of them are very inconsistent at their job, but the inconsistency of the job that they're doing is not coming with any major accountability, and that's a problem. This copyright and broadcast is authorized under internet rights granted by the World Wide Web and is solely for your entertainment of our audience. Any publication, reproduction, or other use of the pictures, descriptions, and accounts of this show without the express written consent of the Past Ball Show, JohnPielli.com, and John Pielli, LLC, is prohibited. Any commercial or other use of the program, such as by charging admission for its showing, is similarly prohibited. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, and I don't spend too much time talking about the Mets, but anytime a team decides for the second or third time over the course of the season to have a team meeting, get together, let's air out our grievances, but most importantly, let's talk about what we need to do to get ourselves back on track. And you can see other teams in Major League Baseball are in a similar situation, but the New York Mets, as they sit right now, the one glaring need that they have, the one thing that is holding them back, is their bullpen. Their bullpen in the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th inning, game in and game out, seems to not give them much of a chance to win. They have 14 games this year that they've led in the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning that they have lost. So those are games that they should have won and they ended up losing. If they won half of those games, they're sitting, as they're around 3 games under 500, could be somewhere around 4 games over 500, and the outlook could be completely different. Now, you hear the general manager, Brodie VanWagenen, as he comes in this past offseason, talking about how the Mets are going to win now, they're going to win in the future, and it's going to be a dawn of a new era in New York City and Queens with the New York Mets. And this team is going to be aggressive. They're going to go out there and make some big moves. They're going to make the big splash, and they're going to win this year, and they're going to have a good enough minor league system that they're going to have an influx of younger players that year in and year out, this is going to be the team to beat. Of course, as they sit right now on this day, things are not going out that way. Things are not working out the way that would have been expected. But once again, as I just mentioned, there's one glaring need that sits there that is hurting them. Their offense has been a lot more consistent as you'd expect. You look at Pete Alonso, who's probably going to win a National League Rookie of the Year, should be on the All-Star team. The guy might hit 50 home runs by the time the year is done. Jeff McNeil competing for a batting title, probably one of the most consistent hitters in Major League Baseball. The two things that they have going right for them is they're both young. So when you think of the extreme, either go in and be very aggressive at the trading deadline or totally quit and sell off your players to get younger, the Mets don't need to do that right now. The Mets youth is up on the Major League roster. And whether it's Pete Alonso or Jeff McNeil or Michael Conforto or Ahmed Rosario or Edwin Diaz, the handful of players that they have, the core of their team for the most part, is young. So you don't need to go out there and trade a bunch of older players to get younger players in your system. Sure, the Mets minor league system probably is about average to below average, probably in the bottom 15 in regards to Major League Baseball's farm systems. I think that's something that's agreeable. But when you look at this roster and you want to say, hey, trade off whatever veterans you have, it's basically Zach Wheeler and that's it. Now, if you're going to make a trade for Seth Lugo, maybe you could demand something heavy back, but I don't think a team out there is going to go out there and give you what you view Seth Lugo as. So the Mets aren't in a position where they can trade players. In fact, the players that you'd want to trade have absolutely no value right now. So the Mets could do one of two things. They could continue to play out the string of games that they have right now and do what they've done the last couple of seasons. Things aren't right by July 31st. Trade whatever you can. And like I said, this year, they're going to have a lot less to trade than they had certainly in 2017 and even last year in 2018. The equivalents of a Juris Familia and a Asdrubal Cabrera and a Jose Bautista don't really exist on the Mets roster. And let's be serious, those guys that were traded didn't necessarily give the Mets a huge haul back. So they're going to have less than that to trade if they choose to make that decision. But Brodie VanWagenen looks very confident. He looks like he feels that this team can turn it around. Mickey Callaway, the manager, is trying to do the best with the talent that he has. And I'll tell you one thing. If Brodie VanWagenen wants to show that this team is a contender, wants to show that he believes in his team, believes in the moves that he made this offseason, believes in that clubhouse as it exists, he would go out there and be aggressive and make not one, but two moves to upgrade players into their bullpen. And there's a couple options that are out there, but I think it would take some outside of the box thinking to make these deals now as opposed to waiting until July 31st. Now, the new trading deadline is it's a hard deadline on July 31st. There'll be no more waivers deadline during the month of during the month of August up until August 31st. So because of that, I do think teams will hold on to players a little bit longer. They'll hold on to players a little bit longer than they normally would, close to July 31st, but we'll see a little bit of sense of urgency as the month is coming to an end. Teams that are looking to trade a player will likely do it before July 31st. So it's kind of a little bit of a back and forth that you're going to think teams are going to want to wait a little bit to make sure they get the best offer for said player. But also, once they get close to July 31st, they're going to probably be looking at what the best offers are in a way to make the trade as opposed to not make the trade. That all being said, if Brodie VanWagenen is all in when it comes to the New York Mets, and if he's all in to make this team better, to make sure this team is in the best position to succeed, he would go out there and he would make a trade or two today. Not tomorrow, not next week, not bring up another couple minor league pitchers to see if they can fit in and maybe do a little bit better, or bring this reliever back or that reliever back, hoping that they'll do a little bit better than they did last time when they were blowing games late for the Mets. He'd go out there, he'd get on the phone with Farin Zaidi of the San Francisco Giants, and he'd make a deal for Mark Melancon. And he'd make a deal for Mark Melancon right now. Now, if you look at Melancon and his contract, sure, over the next couple of years, it doesn't look like it's a great contract to pick up. So here's what I would do. And Mets fans, especially prospect whores and hoarders, are going to be a little pissed off at me when I say this. You have a couple shortstop prospects in your organization. Andres Gimenez, who's your number 1 overall prospect, but you also have Ronnie Maruccio, who's playing down in Low A, Colombia. 18 years old, probably looks like he's going to be a star. So you got 2 top shortstop prospects, and oh yeah, a 23-year-old shortstop playing every day in Ahmed Rosario, who you may want to hold on to for the next series of years. So take advantage of the depth that you have at the shortstop position, and I would trade Andres Gimenez to the San Francisco Giants for Mark Melancon. Now, straight up, player for player, that's what I would do. I wouldn't add anything else. To give up a top prospect in your entire system is a big deal. And the Giants should jump at this offer. They should not ask for anything else. They should just move on and make this deal. The other part of the deal that I would throw in is if you look at Melancon's contract situation, $14 million due for 2019, $14 million due in 2020. I would work out something to where the Giants will be paying a portion of this contract. Where else are they going to be able to make a trade of Mark Melancon for a team's number 1 overall prospect? Jimenez obviously you don't need to sell him to the Giants in regards to why a good young player that can play in the middle infield. If you want to stick around with Brandon Crawford, if you want to move Crawford off his position or just keep Joe Panik, whatever, you get a very good young player that could be in your system and part of your rebuild. But if you're the Mets, you end up maybe taking, I don't know, a little less than half the money to pay to Mark Melancon, have the Giants pick up the rest, and basically if the Giants give you any grief or any crap, you say, where are you going to be able to trade Melancon and get a player as talented as Gimenez to help restock your farm system? The other player I would go after, and I know a lot of people are going to continue to be pissed off at me when I say this, I'd go after Ian Kennedy of the Kansas City Royals. Now, this is going to be a little more tricky. Now, you may be pissed off, like I said, for me suggesting that the Mets should trade their number 1 overall prospect, but when you have another prospect that's 18 years old that plays the same position in the minor leagues and likely moving his way up within the next couple of years, and your starting shortstop happens to be 23 years old, I don't see any problem with that. But acquiring Kennedy would be a little more difficult because you look at his contract. He signed as a starting pitcher after the Kansas City Royals won the World Series in 2015. 5-year contract, $70 million, signed through 2020. So Ian Kennedy, who made the switch from being a starter to a reliever, is doing all right for the Kansas City Royals. It's not like he's setting the world on fire or shutting it down. He's doing a pretty good job, and I think he would be an asset in any team's bullpen, and certainly should the Kansas City Royals and Dayton Moore be fielding some offers out there from other teams in Major League Baseball that are looking to bulk up their bullpen. But Kennedy, $16.5 million this year, $16.5 million next year, is going to put the Royals in a very difficult situation because you can't move a contract like that, especially for somebody that's not, number 1, a very good Major League starter, and number 2, not the elitist of closers. He's not Kenley Jansen. He's not Aroldis Chapman. He's not the elite at his position. It's not like he's going out there and he's lights out and nobody's getting a hit off of him, and he's gone from being a good starter to a fantastic reliever. He's slightly above average. So now the Royals, if they do want to move on, would likely probably want to have some more younger players in there and not be sitting on an Ian Kennedy contract for another season at $16.5 million. So my suggestion here, the Mets, I think, can offer a player that is probably overpaid as well in Juan Lagares. And Juan Lagares, making $9 million this year in 2019, is underperforming. Certainly looks like he's going to be in a position where he'll be a free agent at the end of the year, but the Mets, from the Mets' perspective, they certainly can find a comparable replacement, whether it's Carlos Gomez, whether it's Rajai Davis in the minor leagues. Even if they go out there and check waivers and maybe swing a deal before the trading deadline, they could probably find an upgrade to Juan Lagares. Now, why would Juan Lagares make sense for the Kansas City Royals? Well, the Royals are, in a little bit of transition. Lagares is not an older player by any stretch of the imagination. He's a guy that could, maybe a change of scenery can give you a little bit of a boost. And maybe he can play center field. Maybe him and Billy Hamilton in the same outfield can, increase the defense of the Kansas City Royals outfield. But the most important thing they'd be able to do is shed themselves of some of Ian Kennedy's contract. Now, the rest of what goes back to the Kansas City Royals in his deal is going to be contingent on one thing, and one thing only. How much of Ian Kennedy's contract for the rest of this season and next year are the Kansas City Royals be willing to pick up? The more they're willing to pick up, the more you may be interested in including some players that may be within 15 to 30 on MLB Pipeline's top 30 prospects. Maybe a couple players that have some potential. I don't think you're going to go out there and trade top prospects. I do believe you should trade Andres Gimenez as a top prospect to the San Francisco Giants for Mark Melancon. Number one, it allows you to make the deal now, gives you an advantage over other teams, and you are deep at the shortstop position when it comes to younger players in your own system. I wouldn't be giving up top prospects for Ian Kennedy. Now, Brodie VanWagenen may end up having to spend a little bit more or take on a little more of this contract to bring this pitcher in. But I will tell you this, the Mets play a game against the Atlanta Braves today. They start a series as we hit what we're going to call the halfway point here in the Pass Ball Show, brought to you once again by JohnPielli.com, by St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey, by Two Ways, One Passion food truck located in Scranton, Pennsylvania, by Budweiser, and by Castrol Motor Oil. But looking at this, the series ends against the Braves. You're going to Chicago. You're in the most dire point of the season if you're the New York Mets. What better to reinforce to your team that you're all in, to make sure that clubhouse knows that you're all in, by not making one but two major trades for a relief pitcher. And if the Mets have Mark Melancon and Ian Kennedy in that bullpen by tomorrow when they're playing the Chicago Cubs, I believe you're going to get an uptick in morale in the clubhouse, because it's got to be down right now. You got hitters that are going out there doing their job, producing runs every day. You got starting pitchers that are working into the 7th, the 8th inning, start in and start out, and games being blown by the bullpen. And if Brodie VanWagenen is serious about the New York Mets being a legitimate contender and expecting to win this year, he would pull the trigger on these trades now. We would actually have done it yesterday, but I'd prefer right now. And if he's that serious about what he expects from this team, when he says he expects to win now and in the future, he'd make those moves, have that sense of urgency, and that light would come on to say, hey, you're in dire straits right now. It's now or never. Maybe it's a rock bottom situation, whatever. But the bottom line is, if you're going to win, you're going to have to go for it right now. You can't continue to run out these pitchers that aren't giving you a chance to win. It's not acceptable. It shouldn't be acceptable for the manager, the coaches, or the general manager at this point. The players that you're running out there in your bullpen are just not good enough right now. And if you are serious, if you're not just jerking us around, if you're not just throwing the fans a bone saying, hey, yeah, we tried a little bit, but it didn't work out. We're going to go do the same thing we did in 2018, the same thing we did in 2017, and just quit on the fans, then you're going to go out there and make a move right now. Get a reliever right now. Make a trade with the San Francisco Giants right now. Bring Mark Melancon in. Make that deal work with Kansas City to get Ian Kennedy, work out the financials to share the salary over the course of the next couple seasons, and bring these proven pitchers in there. Kennedy is doing a decent job, if not fairly good, with the Kansas City Royals. Melancon's in a position where I'm sure he would love to close some games. He would love to pitch in the 8th inning for a team that is winning. And you try to inject some life into a bullpen that I have not seen a bullpen that has performed as bad as the New York Mets have. And like I said, if you go in half the games that they blew in the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning this year and made them wins, like you're supposed to, this team will be over 500. This team is not as bad as it seems on paper. Sure, they don't play very good defense, but a lot of teams in Major League Baseball don't play good defense. You got a team that hits well, doesn't hit as many home runs, but hits home runs just like other teams in Major League Baseball, and has a very good starting pitching staff. The only thing that it needs to supplement that is a reliable bullpen. Relievers that you could actually put out there in a Major League game and expect to have the ability to get somebody out. Because that's what they're not doing right now. And it's not fair. I'm not even going to talk about the fans for a second. It's not fair to the players in that clubhouse. It's not fair to the hitters 1 through 9 that are going out there busting their ass every day. It's not fair to the starting pitchers that are pitching as deep in the game as they possibly can with a lead and having these games blown right in front of their face. The personnel that's there right now is not good enough. And if the general manager cannot identify that and get upgrades into that bullpen, that means he doesn't give a shit. That means he doesn't care if this team succeeds this year. And he's said everything to the contrary of that to this point. He hasn't given you the impression at all that he doesn't care. The words that come out of his mouth make it seem like he cares. But it's words. And there's no action behind it. So until he does something to get another reliever in there to pitch in the bullpen for the New York Mets, I'm not trusting him. And I'll tell you, you talk about losing over the course of the season. You talk about maybe losing your job if you're Brodie VanWagenen. Let's say, hypothetically, the Mets decide to go in a different direction and fire the general manager. You know what's worse than losing your job in a position like Brodie VanWagenen has? Is losing credibility. And if he ends up losing credibility, not just amongst the fans, but amongst the players that are in that clubhouse. If the players in that clubhouse don't believe that the general manager is as all in as he says he is, and as all in as the players are, he's going to lose credibility within that clubhouse. And if the Mets continue to run out shitty relievers day after day and blow lead after lead with the same personnel, you're going to lose credibility. And like I said, credibility in this situation is worse than losing your job. This is the famous Budweiser beer. We know of no brand produced by any other brewer that costs so much to brew and age. Our exclusive Beechwood Aging produces the taste, the smoothness, and drinkability you'll find in no beer at any cost. So the NBA draft is going to start tomorrow night. You obviously know about the New Orleans Pelicans having the number 1 overall pick, likely to take Zion Williamson. And then you got the Memphis Grizzlies ready to take Ja Morant out of Murray State. And then, of course, the Knicks sitting there at number 3 getting ready to take R.J. Barrett. Of course, you had the Los Angeles Lakers make a big trade for Anthony Davis, basically moving a handful of players off their roster. And the latest you hear from them is they're looking to trade 3 of the last 4 players that, whose names are not LeBron James and Anthony Davis. And actually, you throw Kyle Kuzma in the mix. So they're looking to free up some more salary space so they can be aggressive when free agency starts. And that's what, June 30th, July 1st, something around that area. But within a couple weeks, you look at the NBA draft as it sits, and you look at some of the players that are out there. And a lot of attention has been on the top 3. And certainly even more attention has been on the top player. Zion Williamson has come out and really, been that kind of almost above the sports celebrity that we haven't seen really since the days of LeBron James. And think about it. What number 1 overall pick has been set to, no matter who is going to have that number 1 overall pick, is going to take that player? And what player has had the hype that Zion has had? And the media obviously has a little bit of control over it, but is a player that's expected right now to go to the New Orleans Pelicans and maybe be better than Anthony Davis and be that player that's going to transcend that franchise. And of course, where they sit with the number 4 overall pick, they're looking to get themselves another top player and maybe grab those 2 players, put them together, and have them be the foundation of what we expect the New Orleans Pelicans to be over the next several years. But, what if Zion takes a couple years to develop? You look at a guy like, Giannis Antetokounmpo with the Milwaukee Bucks and the star that he's become really over the last couple seasons. It took him a while to get there. And I think it's a fair comparison if you're, talking about Zion Williamson to say, hey, maybe he can be a Giannis over the next series of years, but it's going to take time. And if you have that number 1 overall pick and you have a team like New Orleans who has just traded your top player in Anthony Davis, maybe you have a little time to make that work. Ja Morant going to Memphis, which you just about know is going to happen. Oh, a top player that any other team in a draft would love to have. There's no way you could be Memphis or any other team with that number 2 overall pick and not take Ja Morant out of Murray State. And then the Knicks are in a similar situation at number 3 with R.J. Barrett. Once again, any other team, would be falling over themselves to have a player like that. But the one thing that I wanted to talk about is where exactly is the depth in this draft? Because a lot of times you see drafts and players that, end up being the number 1 player taken overall and not, fulfilling, the obligation. You think of, a guy like perhaps, an Anthony Bennett who went to the Cleveland Cavaliers, not being that type of player. But the other players that were in that draft, players that end up getting taken later on, like Giannis and like some other players throughout that draft, ends up working, making that draft a lot better than it really was. And I'm interested to see what ends up happening. You look at a guy like Cam Reddish out of Duke, 3 players really coming off that roster that could go very well in the top 5. 2 of them are going to go in the top 3. But, you look at other players that I do think have some upside. You look at Jarrett Culver, who's a shooting guard for Texas Tech. I think he has some talent. I think he's a player that could be an all-star. I look at, DeAndre Hunter, a small forward out of Virginia, being a player that can be a little bit of a guy that does everything. Could play a little defense, could score a little bit, maybe shoot a little bit, but most importantly, he's going to come across as maybe one of the top defenders in this draft. But I just believe that there's a lot of talk. I look at Gonzaga and Rui Hachimura, who's a guy I got to see a lot in the tournament this year. Looks like a leader. Looks like a player that probably could come in and play right away and be an integral part of a team's core. But once again, a lot of the talk is about Zion and about Morant and about Barrett, and not so much about these other players. So it's interesting to see as the draft ends up happening, where these players end up and what type of impact they end up having on their given roster. So a reminder that Castrol provides maximum protection against viscosity and thermal breakdown. Castrol engineered for today's smaller cars. This is the Pass Ball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. So I did want to touch a little bit on the NHL draft before we end up going today. And as always, I want to thank everybody for tuning in and spending a couple minutes with me. You look at the last couple drafts, and obviously the way things are set up. You think of Hughes and you think of Kaapo, who are probably going to be the number 1 and 2 overall players taken in a draft by the New Jersey Devils and the New York Rangers, respectively. The Devils, who had the first pick over in the draft for the second time in 3 years, took Nico Hischier a couple of years ago and ended up getting into the playoffs that first season. Now, the Rangers just made a trade for a defenseman, are getting set, probably ready to take Kaapo with the number 2 pick, and I think the Devils will take Hughes with the number 1 overall pick. But looking at some of the players in recent years, last year the Buffalo Sabres ended up taking Rasmus Dahlin, who hasn't had a huge impact in the the NHL level yet. Before that it was Hischier going to the New Jersey Devils, but the year before that, in 2016, Toronto ended up taking Auston Matthews, and he ended up being a star. Patrik Laine ended up going to Winnipeg, ended up being a star. The question that I have is the 2 players that are projected to go number 1 and 2, pretty similar to the NBA when we're talking about the top 3 and, the floor dropping after that in regards to talent. There's obviously 2 ridiculously talented players that are expected to go number 1 and 2 overall to the Devils and the Rangers, respectively. How much more talent exists in that NHL draft? There's some decent players out there, but none that have gotten the attention that Hughes and Kaapo have gotten. So you look at, Connor McDavid 4 years ago ends up being taken #1 overall by the Edmonton Oilers. Jack Eichel, who's a decent player, not a star, but a very good, consistent player for the Buffalo Sabres, ended up going #2 overall. It's going to be hard to be up at the level of Matthews and Laine, but you would expect Hughes and Kaapo to be up at the level of at least McDavid and Eichel and hopefully be a little bit better. A little bit of a recap of the show today. We talked about umpires, and we pretty much talked about umpires ad nauseum. What set of officials in sports kind of think more of themselves than Major League umpires do. And no disrespect meant to those that go out there and do their job well every day. The umpires that can deal with a bad day, may have to throw somebody out of the game every once in a while, can maybe admit to a call that's missed, can understand that they're human and they're going to make mistakes. But what about the ones that make the game about them? Make the game like the fans don't go out there to see the players, don't go out there to see the uniforms of their teams, go out there to see the umpires. What about the ones that don't want to be held accountable for their own actions? What about the umpires as it comes to enforcing rules upon themselves when you got players that are suspended game after game for incidents involving umpires, and you never hear about umpires that are suspended for mistakes that they make? Not necessarily decisions on the field, but when they end up handling themselves in an unprofessional manner. And until umpires are held accountable, and there's any system set up to force umpires, if they're not doing their job at the major league level, to be at risk of being suspended, to be at risk of being fined, to be at risk of maybe being demoted to the minor leagues like players in Major League Baseball are, I don't think we're ever going to get this, through this. The umpires and the Umpires Association are going to continue to stand on their soapbox like they run Major League Baseball. And you may see another situation where the umpires decide to go on strike. I hope they do. And Major League Baseball does exactly what it did the last time and accept every one of their resignations. Because there's no accountability to umpires in Major League Baseball. The Ron Culpas of the world, they're telling managers that they can do whatever the hell they want. And any time that there's a situation where, God forbid, something that they're doing is being, spoken about in a negative way or disputed, they say, hey, I'm just going to throw the player out of the game. I'm going to throw the umpire out of the game. God forbid somebody doesn't agree with one of my calls. Now listen, they've taken abuse for years. And I'm not saying that they deserve to take that type of abuse. But they should be held accountable when it's them that's making the mistake and not the player or the manager. If they make a wrong call, there's a chance that that incorrect call can impact the outcome of the game. So if there's a manager there or a player that's pissed off because of a mistake that's made, and a mistake that's made that very well could be the difference in that team winning or losing the game, a mistake that was not made by the player, a mistake that was not made by the manager, a mistake that was made by the umpire, that umpire has to understand that there's going to be somebody that's pissed off. They have to understand that they're going to take a couple words from a player, especially when it's obvious that that call was wrong, especially when replay cannot be used to overturn the incorrect call. The game is not controlled by the umpires. The umpires are there to enforce the rules. And unfortunately, the umpires are human, so just like a player, they're going to make a mistake. Just like a manager, they're going to make a mistake. And just like every one of these fans that think that they're so perfect, they're going to make a mistake too. But there's very limited accountability for Major League Baseball umpires. You can get a job in Major League Baseball as an umpire, screw up as much as you want, and have no risk of being sent down to the minor leagues. Once you're tenured, once you've been there a certain amount of time, it's like a job for life. And there has to be more accountability when it comes to Major League Baseball umpires. We spoke a little bit about the Mets' sense of urgency. Brodie, VanWagenen, listen, if you care that much about wanting this team to be a winner, you would have made a trade yesterday for not one but two relievers to fix a gaping hole that you have in your team right now. If you are all in, be all in. Make the deals that you need to make. I suggest Mark Melancon from the Giants. I suggest Ian Kennedy from the Kansas City Royals. And you know what? If these pitchers come in and they struggle, then you say, hey, at least you made an effort. At least you're not running run-of-the-mill minor league pitchers out there day after day. And they're screwing up the season for you. Spoke a little bit about the NBA draft. Didn't get to talk about the top 3 players in the NBA, though. You obviously got the top 3 players in the draft: Zion Williamson, Ja Morant, RJ Barrett. But who are the top 3 players in the NBA right now? LeBron James, who's been so great in the NBA, certainly deserves to be in the top 3. Kevin Durant has played as the best player in the NBA really over the past season. And then you got Kawhi Leonard. Those will be my top 3. Now we could dispute it. It could be a very good discussion about it because, you know, LeBron may not have been as dominant this past year as he was in previous years. You could also look at other players such as, you know, Durant, who got hurt. You could talk about Giannis and his rise. You could talk about James Harden and the amount of points that he scores day in and day out. It could be a nice discussion, but I would go not necessarily in any order, you know, LeBron, Durant, Leonard, but understanding that that's going to be different next year. Durant's not playing next year. Probably, you know, would be surprised if he ended up playing in a game. So he can't be the best player in the NBA and not be on the court. LeBron James, 8 straight NBA Finals. The Lakers, they're retooling. They're probably going to have a better chance of making the playoffs this year than last year. How much does LeBron have left? And Kawhi Leonard, the season that he had last year with the Toronto Raptors, leading them to the NBA title, number one, where is he going to be? Is he going to go back there? Is he going to end up going to the West Coast? Does he join LeBron James and Anthony Davis with the Lakers? Who knows? But he certainly took some strides as being one of the top players in the NBA. Spoke a little bit about the NHL Draft. Hughes, Kaapo, probably going to be 1-2 to the Devils and the Rangers respectively. Are they going to be Auston Matthews and Patrik Laine of 2016, the 2 top players taken in the draft, becoming absolute stars in the NHL? We'll find out pretty soon. Hopefully everybody enjoys the NBA draft, the NHL draft, obviously Major League Baseball that's going on. Now, NFL training camp we're going to have, you know, pretty soon. So really all sports as they exist right now are certainly in the mix. This is the Passball Show brought to you by JohnPielli.com as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. God bless you. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.